the Duke of Oakley came home 11 days early in his traveling boots and heard his mother's voice through the drawing-room doors saying, "A governess in silk. Well, let us see how the silk likes claret." Then the sound of a glass, and a woman's small gasp, and 30 people laughing the way well-bred people laugh when they have decided a thing is amusing before they know whether it is. Hollies opened the doors. Red wine down the front of a gray gown, from throat to hem. Wine in her hair. Wine spreading on the Aubusson carpet at her feet, and his mother, the Dowager Duchess, standing over her with the empty glass held out like a magistrate's gavel, and Rosamond, his Rosamond, standing very straight indeed with her hands loose at her sides and her chin level, not crying, not fleeing, saying nothing whatever. The room saw him. The laughing stopped in pieces, one voice at a time. "Hollies," his mother said, "you are come back, thank heaven. This creature has been giving herself the most extraordinary airs, new gowns, the small parlor, a ring on her hand, and I have been obliged to." He crossed the room. He did not hurry, because if he hurried he would not be able to govern his voice, and his voice was the only thing in the room he still commanded. He took the wine-soaked hand of the woman in the ruined gown, and turned it over, and drew off the plain gray glove she had put on to hide what was underneath, and held her bare hand up so that the whole company could see the Oakley ring on her third finger, thin gold and a single old garnet, cut in the reign of the second Duke. "You have thrown claret," he said, "on the Duchess of Oakley." He had married her 19 days before, on a Tuesday morning, in the church at Little Oakley, with the vicar and the vicar's wife, and the parish clerk for witnesses, and no flowers at all. He had known her 14 months by then. She had come to Oakley in a hired gig with one box, engaged by his steward to take charge of his dead sister's daughters, Cecily, who was 9, and Tabitha, who was 6, and had not spoken a word to any living soul since the accident on the Dover road that had left her an orphan in a house full of black crape. Hollies, at 34, had inherited the girls along with a dukedom he had not expected and did not want, having been a second son with a modest estate and a great many horses until his brother's death. He had done what a bachelor duke does, engaged people, nurses, a physician from London, a specialist in nervous disorders who had recommended cold baths and had been shown the door. Then a plain young woman of 23 in a brown pelisse had listened to all of it and had asked one question. "Does anybody read aloud to her?" "She does not speak." "That was not my question, Your Grace." He had disliked her intensely for 11 days. She overturned the schoolroom hours. She refused the cold baths in writing. She took Tabitha out into the wet kitchen garden every morning at 7 and knelt in the mud and made her hold seeds. When he demanded an accounting, she said the child had been handled by 11 strangers in a year and required something to be responsible for, and that if his Grace wished to be useful, he might come and hold seeds himself, as she had 2 hands only. He had gone. He had told himself it was to prove a point. He had knelt in the mud of his own kitchen garden in a coat that cost more than her year's wage, and Tabitha had put 6 broad bean seeds into his palm one at a time, and he had come away with a feeling in his chest like a bruise pressed. In March, Tabitha had spoken, not to him and not to Rosamond, but to a bean row in a whisper, counting. He had found Miss Teague afterward on the stairs with her face in her apron, and had stood a foot away and not touched her, and had understood with perfect clarity what had happened to him and how impossible it was. Dukes do not marry governesses. His mother had been telling him for a year whom he was to marry, Lady Sophia Marbury, 22, 4,000 a year, a mother who was the Dowager's dearest friend. There had been an understanding, not on Hollies's part, but understandings in that world seldom required the participation of the man. He had asked Rosamond in June, in the schoolroom, badly. She had refused him. "You cannot," she had said. "The girls have lost a mother and a father. If I marry you, every soul in that county will say the governess trapped the Duke, and Cecily will hear it, and Tabitha will hear it, and they will hear it for 20 years. And your mother will never receive me, and the girls love your mother, and I will not make them choose." "You have not said you do not love me." "I have not said it," Rosamond had agreed, "because it would be a lie, and I am too tired to tell one." So he had done it properly, in the only order that had any honor in it. He had gone to his mother in September and told her, plainly, that he intended to marry Miss Teague, and asked for her blessing. His mother had not spoken to him for 3 weeks. Then she had produced Lady Sophia at dinner, and a settlement drawn up by her own solicitor, and had said, with perfect serenity, that she supposed he would come to his senses by Christmas. That was the night Holly stopped asking. He obtained the license. He told Rosamond what he had done, and that he would not have her name whispered in an inn or a Scottish parlor, but in her own parish church, before the man who had christened her. He told her he would announce it to the county at the Michaelmas dinner with his mother beside him or without her, and that the girls would be told first, by both of them together. Cecily had cried and then demanded to be allowed to hold the flowers. Tabitha had said, aloud, 4 words, "Then she stays here." It was the longest sentence she had yet produced, and Holly's had gone out of the room in order to be a duke somewhere else for a minute. They were married on the Tuesday. And then, because the settlement had to be executed and there were trustees in London and a great many papers, he had gone up to town the same week, 3 weeks. He had said leaving his new duchess at Oakley with the girls, in the small parlor, wearing his ring, with instructions that nothing was to be said until he came back and could stand beside her when it was. He had written to his mother from London, 2 sheets. He had said everything, the church, the date, the witnesses, the fact that Rosamond had refused him twice, the fact that Tabitha had spoken. He had written it as a son writes when he wishes very much to be forgiven, and had franked it and sent it, and had heard nothing at all. The Dowager Duchess of Oakley, it emerged later, had read the first page, seen the word married, and put the letter into the fire in the belief that it concerned Lady Sophia and could be answered in person. Then she had come down to Oakley to arrange the Michaelmas dinner, found a governess in the small parlor in a new gown with a ring on her hand, and drawn the only conclusion her whole life had prepared her to draw. So it was that the Duke of Oakley came home 11 days early, and stood in his own drawing-room, holding his wife's wine-stained hand, watching every ounce of color leave his mother's face. "That is not," the Dowager said. "Holly's, that is a jest." "You burned my letter, then," he said. "I wondered. 19 days, madam, and no answer, and I thought perhaps you were composing something magnificent." He heard his own voice go quiet and dangerous, and could not help it. "I wrote to tell you that I was married. I wrote to ask you to stand beside her. I have come home to find you have thrown wine in her face in front of 30 guests, and that she was wearing gloves in her own house so that you should not see her ring before I could speak." Somebody by the pianoforte set down a cup with a great clatter. "She is a governess," his mother whispered. She is Duchess of Oakley, and she will be so when you and I are both in the chapel floor, and there is no power in England that alters it." He turned. Rosamond. And his wife, who had every right at that moment to burn the house down, said clearly to the room, "My mother-in-law was not informed. That is not her fault, and it is not mine, and it is nobody's business in this room." She lifted the sodden gray skirt an inch, as if it were of no consequence whatever. "The carpet will want salt and cold water within the hour or it is lost. "Ma'am, if you will give me leave, I shall see to it myself. I know the trick of it and the housemaids do not." The company left within the hour. They left with the flustered, delighted haste of people carrying the best news in the county, and Holly stood in the doorway and shook every hand and said, 30 times, that her Grace would be at home on Thursday, and watched them all understand what he was doing. Then he found his wife on her knees in the drawing-room in her ruined gown, working salt into the carpet with a cloth, and he took the cloth out of her hand and drew her up. "Not tonight," he said. "Tonight the carpet may take its chance. It is 140 years old. So is my mother very nearly, and she is also going to have to take her chance." He wiped a smear of claret from her jaw with his thumb, and his hand was not steady. "Rosamond, say something. Be angry, be anything." "I am angry," she said. "I am extremely angry, and I did not intend to spend it in front of Mrs. Marbury, who would have dined on it for a year." She let out a breath that shook. "Hollies, I told you. I told you in June exactly how it would be. You told me your name would be whispered. You did not tell me I would have to watch it." "No," she said. "I hoped you would be spared that." He did not sleep. He sat up in the library writing 3 letters and burning 2, and at 2 in the morning his mother came in with a candle, gray-faced, in a wrapper, looking older than he had ever seen her. She had spent the evening with the parish register sent up from little Oakley, and the license, and the copy of the settlement his London solicitors had executed 9 days since. "It is entirely legal," she said. "Yes. There is nothing to be done." "There was never anything to be done, madam. There was only something to be said, and you burned it unread." He set down the pen. "Sit down. I will tell you what will happen now. She is Duchess of Oakley. You may live here at Oakley in the rooms you have always had, and be grandmother to Cecily and Tabitha, whom you love and who love you. Or you may go to the Dower house at Faring and receive us on days that suit you. What you may not do, not once, not in company, not in a look, is treat my wife as you treated her at 6 o'clock this evening. That is the whole of the arrangement, and I shall not discuss it a second time." His mother's hands closed on each other. "You would put me out of this house." "I would keep my word to her," Holly said. "I find they amount to the same sentence, and I am sorry for it, and it does not alter." She went away without answering. He thought then that he had lost his mother in order to keep his wife, and he sat in the cold library until 4 o'clock, making himself be content with the bargain. What he had not counted on was Thursday. On Thursday morning, before the county came to call, the Dowager Duchess of Oakley went up to the schoolroom to say good-bye to her granddaughters, having ordered the chaise for 11. Hollies followed at a distance, because he was a coward about certain things, and stopped outside the door. Inside, Rosamond was giving a lesson. Not sums, a lesson on a small portfolio of drawings spread over the table, pen sketches of a pony, a spaniel, a bad but affectionate study of a woman in a garden hat. "And whose hand is that?" Rosamond was asking. "Mamma's," said Cecily. "And this is her writing here at the corner, look. She has put the date and she has spelled Bartholomew wrong, which I think is a great comfort to everybody. Tabitha, what was she called?" A pause, then small and clear. "Lady Anne." "Lady Anne Oakley, that was. And whose girl was she before she was your mamma?" "Grandmamma's," said Tabitha. Hollies heard his mother make a sound in the doorway that he would not forget as long as he lived. His sister had been dead 16 months. In all that time, nobody at Oakley had said her name above a murmur, because the dowager's grief had gone into the house like frost into stone, and the household had learned that Lady Anne was not to be mentioned. Hollis himself had not been able to say it. And a governess of 3 and 20 had gathered up every scrap of the woman's hand she could find in the muniment room and the nursery cupboards, and had been teaching 2 motherless girls their mother twice a week since Candlemas, without telling anyone, because she had judged correctly that no one else in the house was able. The Dowager stood in the doorway a long time. "You kept her drawings," she said at last. Rosamond rose. "There is a box of them, ma'am. There are more than I can use. I did not like to bring them to you unasked." "Bring them to me asked," said the old woman, and her voice broke in the middle of it, and she sat down on the low schoolroom chair meant for a 9-year-old, in her traveling silk, with her hands over her face. Nobody went to Faring that day. The chaise was sent away unloaded. It was not instantly mended. Hollis had lived long enough to distrust anything that mends instantly. His mother was proud, and had been wrong in front of 30 people, and both facts sat in her like splinters for a fortnight. She was stiff at breakfast. She addressed Rosamond as Duchess in a tone that could have cut glass. But at the Michaelmas dinner, 3 weeks later, with the same company at the same table, and Mrs. Marbury seated too near the salt for her own satisfaction, the Dowager Duchess of Oakley stood up before the second course and struck her glass with a spoon. "On the 9th of this month," she said, "in this room I did a thing I have no excuse for. I had burned my son's letter unread, and I chose to believe the worst of a young woman on no evidence but her wages. I threw wine on the Duchess of Oakley in front of every one of you." She lifted her chin, and Hollis saw, with reluctant admiration, precisely where he had got his own worst manners from. "You will all have said so 100 times by now, and you may keep saying it, for it is true. I ask her pardon, and I am obliged to add that she has already given it, which I did not deserve and shall not forget. Her Grace has taught my grandchildren the name of my daughter when I could not. There is not a woman in England better fitted to be mistress of this house." Then she sat down and ate her soup as though nothing whatever had occurred, and the county talked of it for 11 years. Afterward, when the guests were gone and the candles were guttering, Hollis found his wife in the small parlor with her shoes off, laughing helplessly into a cushion. "She called me better fitted than any woman in England," Rosamond said, "in front of Mrs. Marbury. Hollis, I shall never be able to repay her. There is no currency." "Try astonishing gentleness," he said. "It appears to work on this family." He knelt down by her chair, the Duke of Oakley, on the parlor floor, which was becoming a habit with him, and took her hand and turned the thin garnet ring with his thumb. "19 days I left you here alone," he said. "It is the single worst act of my life, and I have shot a man in the arm and once refused my own father a hearing, so the competition was not trifling. You want to make me safe on paper. I went because I wished everything to be in order before I spoke, and my mother threw wine on you while I was being orderly in London." He looked up. "I do not intend to be careful again. From tomorrow you are announced everywhere. You sit at the head of my table, you carry the keys, and the first person who says the word governess in your hearing in a tone I dislike will be answered by me on the spot, in company, at whatever cost." Rosamond put her hand against the side of his face. "You will make yourself talked about," she said. "Madam, I married the governess," said the Duke of Oakley. "I am talked about in 4 counties, and I have never in my life been so well pleased with anything I have done." The gray gown was never worn again. The stain would not come out. Rosamond had it cut down for cleaning cloths, which scandalized the housekeeper, and kept only the collar, which she pressed flat in the back of the household book beside a bean-row drawing signed by a 6-year-old. Years later, Cecily grown betrothed, and Impossible asked her uncle why her aunt kept a strip of old gray stuff in the accounts. Because a great many people in this house were wrong about her on the same evening, the Duke of Oakley said, and she was the only one who stayed kind through it. She keeps it to remind us. I keep it to remind me that the best thing I ever brought into Oakley arrived in a hired gig with one box.